I'm here with John Torrens. He's going to talk to us about pitching your game, which is something that a lot of developers find incredibly daunting. And they spend a lot of time hiding away in their room on their own, making their game, and then they have to show it to someone and tell them why it's good and why it's worth investing in. And I'm sure you've got some good advice for us on that. So whereabouts do you start? If you're an indie developer, you've got a game, you want to take it out there to people, where do you start?
I think that's knowing who you're going to be talking to is probably the first thing. Actually understanding what is the company that they represent. Even better, look up individuals if you've got their names, put a face to the name so you understand who they are as soon as you meet them. And then really it's getting comfortable talking about the game itself, but also the great qualities that you have. And I think typically people worry about saying that they're good at something. So there's nothing wrong with owning that and telling someone how good you are at something.
Because there's an old adage that seems to be kind of true, which is a lot of time people are investing more in people than they are in products. You know, you might have a good game, but they really want to know what it is about you that's going to drive this to the finish line and it's going to add something to their roster.
100%, yeah. Well, it's like an interview. You could have someone who's very qualified. So in the case of pitching your game, the game could be brilliant, but if they don't like you, then they're not going to work with you. It doesn't matter how good the game is. And so I think to be likable and make that connection, it's simply about relaxing, having a conversation, being open and honest about everything, sharing all the great stuff in the game, but just being likable and relatable.
Are there any real tips for what not to do? Because I imagine one of the things that happens a lot is people go into this with no experience and not really thinking about it, and probably make some really big common mistakes. So are there any of those that you could help us avoid?
Well, one I have seen is going too much into the fiction of the game. In a nice way, whoever you're pitching to doesn't really care about that. They just want to see it. I think not getting the game into someone's hands if you have it is a big mistake. I think if you've got some playable code, if you've got something that someone can play, that will enable them to understand your game as quickly as possible, more than you can tell them. So much better to put it in their hands, let them play with it, and then they can ask you questions about the game and about your team who's developing it.
So don't give them 10,000 years of lore and the endless relationships of kings and empires.
Yes.
Get the game in front of people, get it into hands and get some feedback. I suppose one of the important things to do is what people are doing here as well, which is getting it into hands and actually getting them to fill in feedback in a way so you can present other people's opinions already, and maybe that backs you up a little bit if you're looking for investors.
Yes, I mean, when I was a game designer, I definitely suffered, as I think we all do, getting too familiar with the game and assuming that someone would play it a particular way. And then you have that lovely rude awakening where you put it into the hands of someone who has had no experience with it. And they do all kinds of things. And they're doing it wrong. It's just getting it in people's hands and just watching what they do. And even better, just shut up and watch and just notice everything. And if they've got questions, for goodness sake, answer the questions and talk to them about it.
So it's the indie games market especially keeps growing and growing. I mean, at every show I go to, there's more and more people doing more and more things. So that's positive in a way. There's a lot more out there for people to play. There's a lot more choice for publishers, but that also means it's kind of harder to stand out. What are some things that you would suggest people do to kind of stand out in an ever more crowded market of games?
Well, I'm not sure about how to stand out in terms of the idea. How to have an original idea would be a wonderful thing I could just slot in just there. But I think I was just watching Chris Phillip, who was talking about getting funding for games. And he was talking about being open and communicative and responsive. And so I think doing that with players is great. Just having a good conversation with them, maybe even following up. And if you can establish some kind of relationship with someone where they follow you and they're interested, so that they can give you some more ideas about the directions you might go in.
Yeah, it seems to be more and more common nowadays as well that people try to build an online audience for themselves at the same time as developing. Is that something that publishers and like will look for nowadays when they're looking for a game? Will they prefer an audience, or does it not matter so much?
I think if you can say, I've got this many players, regardless of what that publisher or whoever you're pitching to actually thinks of what you've got, that's something unequivocal. There's absolute proof there. So if you say I've got 1,000 people, not just followers, but people actually playing, and here's some data, I think that's a certain amount of proof that you can't really deny.
So if people want more advice and more input on exactly what we're talking about pitching, where can they find you online?
You can go to my website on johntorrens.co.uk. I'm also very easy to find on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for those snippets of advice. I'm sure people will come and find you and get some more in-depth tutoring.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.